Watch a 2-year-old who hasn't gotten the same number of cookies as their sibling. The outrage is visceral, immediate, total. They can barely speak in full sentences, but they know, with absolute certainty, that this is wrong. They haven't been taught philosophy or ethics. Nobody has explained justice to them, yet somehow they already understand fairness, and they'll go to war over it. Why? Fairness isn't something we learn, it's something we are. Before we can read, before we understand money or politics or complex social structures, we already have a deep, almost primal sense of what's fair and what isn't. And when that sense is violated, we don't just think it's wrong. We feel it in our gut, in our anger, in our moral outrage. Today, we're exploring why fairness is so fundamental to being human. We'll trace it back to our evolutionary origins, and why cooperation required keeping score. Examine how it became the bedrock of every law and social contract we've ever made. Understand why unfairness triggers such powerful emotions. Discover how empathy transforms fairness from instinct into morality. And explore how different cultures define fairness in surprisingly different ways. This is the story of our most basic moral instinct, the ancient arithmetic of survival. Long before we had currency, contracts, or courts, we had something more fundamental: the need to cooperate. And cooperation has a math problem built into it. Imagine you're a human living 50 million years ago. You go hunting with 3 others. You bring down a large animal, more food than any single person needs. How do you divide it? If the split is obviously unequal, if one person takes the majority while others starve, something breaks. Trust evaporates. Next time you call for a hunt, people don't show up. You die alone. This is why evolutionary psychologists believe fairness isn't a luxury of civilization. It's a prerequisite for it. Species that cooperate successfully need mechanisms to ensure that cooperation pays off for everyone involved. Fairness is that mechanism. It's the emotional and cognitive software that makes the hardware of cooperation actually work. Studies of capuchin monkeys demonstrate this beautifully. In one famous experiment by Frans de Waal, monkeys were trained to exchange tokens for food. When both monkeys received cucumber slices for their tokens, everyone was happy. But when one monkey received grapes, a much preferred food, while the others still got cucumber for the same token, the cucumber receiving monkey didn't just accept the inequity. It threw the cucumber back at the researcher in what can only be described as primate outrage. These monkeys hadn't been to philosophy class. They hadn't read Rawls or Kant. But they understood, at a fundamental level, that the deal had become unfair. And unfairness, even for capuchin monkeys, is intolerable. If our evolutionary cousins have this sensitivity, we've likely been carrying it for millions of years, because groups that enforced fairness survived, and groups that didn't fell apart. The invisible architecture of everything. But fairness is more than an evolutionary hangover. It's the foundation upon which we've built every complex social structure humans have ever created. Every law, every contract, every government, every institution, all of it rests on the assumption that there are fair ways and unfair ways to treat people. Think about it. Why do we have laws against theft? Because taking someone's property without compensation is unfair. Why do we have courts? To adjudicate disputes when people disagree about what's fair. Why do we have constitutions that limit government power? Because unlimited power inevitably leads to unfair treatment. The entire edifice of civilization is an elaborate attempt to systematize, codify, and enforce our basic intuition about fairness. Social contracts, the implicit agreements that hold societies together, only work if people believe the underlying deal is roughly fair. When citizens feel the contract has become unfair, when the rules benefit some while burdening others, When outcomes seem disconnected from effort or merit, the contract starts to fracture. This is the root of virtually every revolution, protest movement, and social upheaval in history. Not hunger alone, not oppression alone, but the sense that the fundamental deal has become unjust. John Rawls, perhaps the most influential political philosopher of the 20th century, built his entire theory of justice around this intuition. His famous Veil of Ignorance thought experiment asks, what kind of society would you design if you didn't know what position you'd occupy in it? Rich or poor? Powerful or powerless? The answer, he argued, would naturally tend toward fairness, because fairness is what rational people want when they don't know if they'll be on the winning or losing end of the arrangement. The fire in your belly when someone cuts in line. But fairness isn't just a concept we think about. It's something we feel, intensely and immediately. And those feelings can override almost everything else, including our own self-interest. The ultimatum game demonstrates this perfectly. In this economic experiment, one person is given money, say $100, and must propose how to split it with another person. The second person can either accept the split, in which case both keep their shares, or reject it, in which case neither person gets anything. Rationally, the second person should accept any offer above zero. $1 is better than nothing. But that's not what happens. When offers are perceived as unfair, usually anything less than about 30% of the total, people reject them at remarkably high rates. They would literally rather get nothing than accept what they perceive as an unfair deal. They'll pay a cost to punish unfairness, even when it hurts them too. This is the emotional power of fairness. It's not a calm calculation, it's a visceral response. When you see someone cut in line, when you learn your coworker makes more for the same work, when you watch someone cheat and get away with it, you don't just think, that's suboptimal. You feel anger, indignation, a burning desire to set things right. Your heart rate increases, your muscles tense, your brain's reward centers light up at the prospect of punishment, even costly punishment. This emotional intensity serves a purpose. If fairness were just an abstract preference, it would be easy to ignore when convenient. But when unfairness triggers real anger, real pain, real outrage, we're motivated to act on it, to enforce norms, to punish cheaters, to demand justice. Our emotions are the enforcement mechanism for the fairness instinct. From instinct to ethics, the empathy bridge. But here's where human fairness becomes something more than just evolutionary scorekeeping. Somewhere in our development, both as individuals and as a species, fairness stops being about, did I get my share? And becomes about, is this right? This transformation happens through empathy. Watch a child develop moral reasoning and you'll see it unfold. A very young child cares about fairness when it affects them directly. She got more than me is about personal grievance. But somewhere around age 5 to 7, something shifts. Children begin to protest unfairness even when it doesn't affect them, even when it benefits them. Show a young child a scenario where one puppet helps another while a third puppet does nothing. Then give both puppets the same reward, and the child will object. Not because they didn't get a reward, they're not in the scenario at all, but because it's not right. The helper should get more. Justice should prevail. This is empathy doing its work. When we can imagine ourselves in another's position, when we can feel their experience, fairness expands from self-interest to morality. We want fair treatment, not just for ourselves but for others, even strangers, even people we'll never meet. This is how fairness becomes the foundation of ethics, how it transforms from an evolutionary tool into a moral principle. Studies of moral development show that empathy and fairness reasoning develop together. Children with stronger empathetic responses show earlier and more sophisticated fairness reasoning. Conditions that impair empathy, like certain forms of autism or psychopathy, also tend to correlate with different fairness intuitions. We literally feel our way into moral understanding, and fairness is one of the first moral concepts we grasp because it's one we can feel most directly. The kaleidoscope, fairness across cultures. But here's where it gets complicated. While the instinct for fairness appears universal, what actually counts as fair varies dramatically across cultures, and this variation tells us something crucial about fairness itself. In Western, educated, industrialized, rich, and democratic societies, what researchers call weird cultures, fairness often means equal distribution or merit-based allocation. Same work, same pay, equal portions. May the best person win. But this is far from universal. In some collectivist cultures, fairness means distributing resources according to need, not equality. A parent who gives more food to a hungry child than a well-fed one isn't being unfair. They're being appropriately responsive. In hierarchical societies, fairness might mean respecting status differences. Equal treatment across ranks could be seen as disrespectful, even unfair. The ultimatum game, when played across different cultures, shows fascinating variation. In some societies, people reject unfair offers at similar rates to Americans. In others, they're much more accepting of unequal splits. In still others, people sometimes reject offers that are too generous, feeling uncomfortable with receiving more than their fair share. What this tells us is that while the fairness instinct is hardwired, the algorithm for calculating fairness is culturally programmed. We all care deeply about fairness, but we don't all agree on what it means. Your culture teaches you whether fairness means equality, equity, need-based distribution, or status-appropriate treatment. It shapes when you feel that burning sense of injustice and when you feel that satisfying sense that things are right. So why is fairness so fundamental to humans? Because we are, at our core, a cooperative species, and cooperation requires trust, and trust requires fairness. Without the ability to recognize and enforce fair dealing, we couldn't form stable groups, build complex societies, or accomplish anything that requires working together over time. But fairness is more than just evolutionary scaffolding we're stuck with. It's been elevated through empathy and culture into something approaching a universal moral principle. The 2-year-old screaming about cookies and the philosopher writing treatises on justice are drawing from the same deep well. The intuition that people should get what they deserve, that the rules should apply consistently, that the game shouldn't be rigged. Yet fairness is also a mirror that reflects our cultural assumptions back at us. What seems obviously fair to you might seem obviously unfair to someone raised in a different culture with different values. We all want fairness, but we don't all want the same kind of fairness. And this creates one of humanity's most persistent challenges. How do we build fair systems when we can't even agree on what fairness means? Perhaps the answer is to recognize that the instinct itself is more important than any particular implementation of it. The fact that we all care about fairness, that we all feel the sting of injustice, that we all seek some version of fair dealing, this common ground might be enough to build on, even when our specific definitions differ. Because in the end, fairness isn't just a concept or a feeling. It's the thing that makes us human together. Here's my question for you. Think about the last time you felt that visceral sense of unfairness. What specifically triggered it? And how much of that definition of fair came from your culture versus some deeper instinct? I'm genuinely curious about how people experience this most fundamental of moral emotions. Share your thoughts in the comments. And if you want more explorations of what makes us human, subscribe for weekly deep dives into psychology and philosophy.